Hey, it's Professor Shoemaker, and now we're going to have a look at loans. Loans have four functions that we're going to study in Excel, and they're all interrelated. Unlike the other topics we've gone through so far, loans require some concept setups in order to be able to understand how they work. So this first presentation in the loans is meant to give you concepts of how loans work, and then in the next video, we'll go on and apply them in the loan functions. So, when you get a loan, you are borrowing money, and it is just like renting an apartment. When you rent an apartment, it's yours to use for the period that you rent it, say a year. But when you're done with it, you have to give it back. When you borrow money, that money is yours to use for whatever the period of the loan is, but when it's done, you have to give it back. So it's an exact analogy between the two of them. While you use the apartment, you pay rent on it. And you do the same thing with a loan, except that instead of calling it rent, we call it interest. But it's exactly the same thing. You're paying money for the use of something that belongs to somebody else, whether it's the apartment or the money that you borrowed to buy a house or a car or something like that. Now, there's some of the lingo of a loan you need to get your arms around, and these relate to the functions that we're going to look at. And one of the terms that will pop up in their functions is present value. There's a present value function. And it's the amount that you borrow. So if you borrow $10,000 to buy a car, then that's the present value. It's the amount of money that you borrow at the beginning of the loan. It's like the apartment itself. When you're done renting the apartment, you have to give it back. And when you're done with the loan, you have to give back the present value also. A wrinkle in it is that it's commonly called the principal as well. So you hear people talking about the principal of the loan. Well, that's the amount that you borrow. It's the present value at the beginning of the loan. Another important terminology is the interest rate. That is the amount of rent that you pay on the loan. It's stated as a percentage of the principal that you pay to rent the money for some period of time. One of the things that's important to get your arms around here with interest rate is it doesn't make any sense. The term interest rate doesn't make any sense unless you also say over what period of time. And that'll get clear as we begin to look at things. But you just understand that interest rate has no meaning unless you also specify the time that you're charging the interest rate over. So let's take a look at a simple loan. These are simpler than we're going to look at in what we do. Because in this case, you borrow $10,000 at a 5% annual interest rate. Notice how I specified the time for 5%. And you agree to pay it all back with interest in a single payment at the end of the year. Now, this is called a simple loan because you pay it all back in one payment. In the real life loans that we'll look at in the class, you pay it back in a series of payments over a period of time. So, okay, 5% annual interest rate, you pay it all back. At the end of the year, you'll return the $10,000 of principal, that's the present value also, and you'll pay an additional $500 in interest. That is the $10,000 principal times the 5% annual interest rate equals $500. So at the end of the year, you pay back a total of $10,500. And the $500 is the rent that you paid on the $10,000 to have it all for the period of that year. Now, let's take this example and say instead that you borrow the money over a period of 2 years at 5% annual interest rate. That's another way of saying that it's 5% per year. And let's see how that loan works. So you borrow $10,000 at 5% interest rate per year and agree to pay it all back with interest in a single payment at the end of 2 years. You'll return the $10,000 of principal just like last time, but the interest is a little more complicated because of the effect of time. That is, we've added a second year onto the loan. So let's see how that works. For the first year, you're borrowing $10,000, and the interest in the first year is $500. That's the simple example we looked at before. So $10,000 in principal times 5% annual interest rate is $500. And at the end of the first year, you owe $10,500 at the end of the first year, or to think of it a different way, at the end of the first year going into the second year of the loan, you owe the person $10,500. So in the second year, you aren't borrowing $10,000 anymore. Now you're borrowing $10,500 because of the rent or the interest that accumulated in the first year of the loan. So for the second year, you're borrowing $10,500, and at the end of that second year, $10,500 of principal, that was the amount for the second year, at 5% interest rate is $525 for the second year. So at the end of the second year, when you pay everything back, you're going to pay back the $10,000 of principal plus $500 interest for the first year, plus $525 interest on the second year, for a total of $11,025 is what you pay back. In other words, in the second year, you're paying interest on the first year's interest. You're paying interest on interest. And that's why you wind up paying $525 in the second year. That $25 is the interest that you paid to borrow the $500 for the second year. So the effect of time has an enormous effect on it, and why you can't really tell how a loan's working unless you understand what the role of time is inside the loan. Just another example to try and bring home the effect of time. Suppose you have a job, a college summer job of painting houses over the summer, and you give two homeowners at the beginning of the summer estimates for $4,000 each to paint their houses. They're similar houses. The jobs are about the same size. So you tell each homeowner it would be $4,000 to paint your home. Both homeowners accept your offer, but one person says, I'll pay you as soon as the job is done. And the other one says, I don't have the money yet, but I'll pay you in December when I get my year-end bonus from my job. So it looks the same, $4,000. They're both willing to pay you the same amount of money for the same job, but one wants to wait a while to pay you. So which job is more valuable to you? The one where the payment is at the end of the job or the end of the year? Well, the one where you get payment sooner is more valuable, because what really is going on in the second deal is if you agree to paint their house now but accept the $4,000 6 months later, then you've taken on a dual role. You're not just a painter, you're also a bank. Because when you're done with the job, they owe you the $4,000, and you are lending it to them until they pay you. So you've taken off your painter's hat and put on a banker's hat, and you've become a bank that's issuing a loan. That's an important thing to understand if you ever get into business, because it's important to understand, gee, my business is painting houses. My business is not making loans, and so on. So normally in a situation like that, you'd want to charge them interest. You'd want him to pay more than the $4,000, because you're making a loan, they're using your money while you can't. And in any time you loan money, there's always a risk that the person will not be able to pay it back when they said that they will. They may want to delay payment, or they may never pay it back. The person could lose their job, they could die, who knows what happens, and all of a sudden you're left holding the bag as the banker, and the other person doesn't pay you back. So that's the basic setup on a loan. This business of principal and interest and time and money. And now we'll go ahead and look at some examples in the next video of how we actually apply these concepts in using the actual functions.